Mitchell. I am the Director of the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water at the New York State Department of Public Service. I've been designated to serve as the alternate representing the chair of the New York State Board on Electric Generation Siting and the Environment. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board on Electric Generation Siting and the Environment to order. Before we get started, I would like to note our arrangements for the meeting today. In line with the guidelines concerning social distancing and minimizing large gatherings, and in keeping with the executive orders suspending provisions of the Open Meetings Law on an emergency basis, we are conducting today's meeting remotely. I would like to remind those who are participating by phone to please mute their lines except when they are speaking. The public will have the opportunity to listen to the meeting by going to the department's webcast page. We will also record and transcribe the meeting as has been our practice. These arrangements have been reviewed by our general counsel, and he has found that they meet the requirements of the executive orders and that they meet my own expectations of honoring the intent of the Open Meetings Law. Before moving to the agenda, I would like to introduce the alternates representing the permanent members of the Siting Board. When I call your name, please confirm that you are present on the call. Louis Alexander, alternate for Basil Sagos, Department of Environmental Conservation.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Elizabeth Lewis Michael, alternate for Dr. Howard A. Zucker, Department of Health.
Present.
Thank you. Vincent Ravishir, alternate for Eric Gertler, Acting Commissioner, New York State Department of Economic Development, and President and Chief Executive Officer Designate, Empire State Development.
Present.
Thank you. John Williams, alternate for Richard Kaufman, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Present.
Thank you. And I would like to introduce the ad hoc members for case 17-F-0597. Please confirm that you are present when I call your name. Keith Waters.
Present.
Thank you. And Rick Bertucci.
Present.
Thank you. Secretary Phillips, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda. However, I would like to note that today's agenda includes 6 separate items. 2 of the items will be considered separately by the siting boards for those respective cases. The remaining 4 items will be considered and decided by the permanent members of the siting board based on written reviews and analyses previously made available to them. We will refer to these 4 items as consent agenda items.
Thank you, Secretary Phillips. We will start with case 17-F-0597, application of High River Energy Center, LLC, for a certificate of environmental compatibility and public need pursuant to Article 10 of the Public Service Law for construction of a solar electric generating facility located in the town of Florida, Montgomery County, presented by Sean Laney, Administrative Law Judge, Department of Public Service. Richard Sherman, Administrative Law Judge, Department of Environmental Conservation, Bacon LeCake, Chief Administrative Law Judge, Department of Public Service, and Robert Rosenthal, General Counsel, are available for questions. Judge Mullaney, please begin.
Good morning, Interim Chair Designee Mitchell and members of the Siting Board. I presided as the presiding examiner over this case with Associate Examiner Richard Sherman of the DEC. I want to offer brief remarks this morning on the item before you, a proposed order of the Siting Board granting a Certificate of Environmental Compatibility and Public Need to the High River Energy Center, LLC, subject to certain terms and conditions. High River Energy Center, which I'm going to refer to just as High River or applicant, is a wholly owned indirect subsidiary of Next Era Energy Resources, LLC. High River proposes to construct and operate, a commercial-scale solar electric generating facility within the town of Florida, Montgomery County, New York State. Project is a large-scale renewable energy facility that will generate 90 megawatts of renewable energy and will occupy approximately 582.5 fenced-in acres within an overall 1,425-acre project area. The project will consist of utility-scale arrays of solar photovoltaic panels and related facilities, and will supply electricity to the New York State bulk electric transmission system. The grant of a certificate to High River will be subject to the conditions that are attached to the proposed order. The proposed order is supported by a robust and extensive evidentiary record that supports all of the statutory findings that the Siting Board must make before issuing a certificate pursuant to Article 10 of the Public Service Law. The Article 10 review process in this case was extensive, fair, and open, and included both pre-application and post-application phases. Notice to the public was provided with respect to all significant milestones in this case. There were many instances of community outreach and education, and numerous opportunities for public participation. High River carried out a public involvement program which included, among other things, establishing a project-specific website, local document repositories, and a toll-free telephone number for access to project information. In addition, throughout the Article 10 process, the Department of Public Service carried out extensive public outreach and sent notice of all significant milestones to the party and service lists. The department also hosted a public statement hearing and solicited public comments through multiple other means. Aside from the state agency parties in this case, which included the Department of Public Service, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and the Department of Health, the town of Florida, and a local citizens group, the Citizens for Responsible Solar Farm Placement, were the active parties in this case. The town of Florida and the citizens group were each awarded $15,750 in pre-application intervenor funding and were each awarded $45,000 in application funding. Through October of 2020, the department received approximately 178 public comments through the various avenues available. Project opponents have voiced strong concerns on a range of matters, including High River's alleged unwillingness to provide enough financial support to the town to offset project impacts to wildlife, impacts to local community character, impacts to visual resources, public health, and local tourism. Some opponents to the project cited construction impacts, destruction of historic and unspoiled views, pollution of groundwater from the facility during operation, fire hazards, and noise. On the other hand, project supporters pointed to the project's expected economic benefits, including increased job opportunities and tax benefits. They also pointed to the fact that the project will provide a reliable source of revenues to local municipalities, the fact that participating landowners will receive revenues that will help support family-owned and operated farms. Comments in support also noted that the project will support wholesale energy markets and will help to address climate change and global warming. Supporters also described solar energy development as preferable to the subdivision and commercial and/or residential development of existing farms. The documents attached to the proposed order, which include the proposed certificate conditions, the site engineering and environmental plan guide, and the noise complaint resolution protocol, were the result of successful settlement negotiations by and between High River, DPS trial staff, DEC staff, and the Department of Agriculture and Market staff. These documents set forth terms and conditions supporting the proposed grant of a certificate, and these terms and conditions would be incorporated into the proposed order. The record supports a finding by the board that the probable environmental impacts of the construction and operation of the facility will be minimized or avoided to the maximum extent practicable, provided that the applicant complies with the certificate conditions. The record also supports the finding by the board that the facility is designed to operate in compliance with all applicable state and local environmental, health, and safety law and regulations. The proposed order finds that the construction and operation of the project will serve the public interest because the project will be consistent with state energy policies, long-range energy planning objectives, the strategies set forth in the most recent state energy plan, and the additional social, economic, and other factors deemed relevant by the board. Therefore, the examiners recommend that the citing board adopt the proposed order, and we are available for any questions from the members of the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Mullaney, for the clear and thoughtful presentation and for the underlying work that went into this case. I believe this order flows from the record and a process that has been public, open, and thorough. The certificate conditions are appropriate and flow from settlement negotiations. In my judgment, the identified impacts have been minimized, avoided, or mitigated to the maximum extent practical. I believe the resolution is balanced, well-grounded, and serves New York State's climate and energy policies, as well as social, economic, and community considerations, and I'm going to support this item. Let me now turn to my fellow board members for any comments or questions. Mr. Alexander?
Thank you. I have only two questions regarding the High River proceeding. Judge Mullaney, thank you for your presentation today. My first question relates to glare impact issues that were, assessed in the application and its supplement raised by citizens for responsible solar placement and which were discussed in the order. Could you briefly describe the impacts of glare as evaluated in this proceeding?
Judge Mullaney, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Deputy Commissioner Alexander. To your question, in order to identify potential impacts on residents and roads, High River performed a glint and glare analysis with respect to the project's original layout and later updated that analysis based on a modified layout proposal. As specified by the Department of Public Service staff in the pre-application stipulations process, the model used by High River for evaluating glare impacts is the Solar Glare Hazard Analysis Tool, or SGHAT. This was developed by Sandia National Laboratories. This modeling tool was designed to protect pilots operating aircraft at airports, and the theory being that by protecting pilots and by implication passengers, the model is designed to assure public health and safety. The SGHAT modeling is an inherently conservative model for several reasons. First, it does not account for physical obstructions between the solar arrays and the receptors. It does not account for atmospheric and meteorological conditions, and it assumes that every visual receptor has a full-on view of the entire project. High River's glint and glare analyses determined that using the standards of 60 hours per year and a subsidiary standard relating to the number of minutes per hour over a 3-month period, that the project would not present any instances of glare that would impact or have a significant adverse impact in the area surrounding the project. DPS staff agreed that the glare analysis reflects High River's adequate, reasonable efforts to identify potential glare impacts and to reduce impacts through mitigation measures. One thing that DPS staff requested was that High River extend the coverage of the complaint resolution plan set forth under Certificate Condition 60 to address complaints about glare exceeding the 60-hour annual standard. High River has agreed to do so. Accordingly, if a complaint is found to be valid under the complaint procedure, High River or the certificate holder will provide mitigation such as vegetative buffers or window treatments. Based on this, the DPS staff's position is that the facility is proposed and amended and subject to the proposed certificate conditions would avoid, minimize, or reasonably offset the potential for the project to result in significant adverse glare impacts.
Judge Mullaney, thank you for that explanation. It's very helpful for me. My second question is more of a comment and relates to the decommissioning of this facility at the end of its operational life. One of my concerns in these matters is to ensure that a local community is not burdened by decommissioning costs. And in this case, I understand that the decommissioning for this project will take approximately 4 to 6 months as estimated. I know that the certificate conditions, I believe it is Certificate Condition 51, provides a number of safeguards for the town. Anything further that you would want to note about the protections that are provided in this order?
Well, you are correct, Deputy Commissioner Alexander. The Certificate Condition 51 sets forth requirements for project decommissioning. Overall, the intent is to make sure that the local community is not impacted after the project ceases operation and the site is decommissioned. So, in accordance with that goal, Certificate Condition 51 requires that before installing the solar panels and based on the final layout, the certificate holder has to provide a decommissioning plan and proof of financial security. That's going to be done in a compliance filing. The certificate holder will consult with town representatives concerning final decommissioning estimated costs to get input from the local officials. And the certificate holder will also provide the town with the cost basis for the applicants or the certificate holders' cost estimates. There's a requirement for financial security in the form of a letter of credit in the amount of the decommissioning and site restoration estimate. And those monies are established to be used solely for the benefit of and held by the town of Florida. The letter of credit has to be in effect for the life of the project. And the certificate holder will work with DPS staff in the town of Florida on the acceptable form of a letter of credit. So overall, staff's review of these provisions indicates that they represent a reasonable and appropriate approach to decommissioning of the project and will achieve the goal of ensuring decommissioning and protecting the locality from any financial impacts of said decommissioning.
Judge Mullaney, thank you very much. Chair Mitchell, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Dr. Lewis Michael, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you. No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Ravishir?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Thank you, no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Waters?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Vertucci?
No questions.
Thank you. I will now call for a vote. This is Tammy Mitchell, and my own vote is in favor of the recommendation to approve the application of High Energy River Center, LLC, for a Certificate of Environmental Compatibility and Public Need as just described. Mr. Alexander, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis Michael, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Mr. Ravishir, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Mr. Waters, how do you vote?
So, representing the community that this project impacts, I vote no.
Thank you. Mr. Vertucci, how do you vote?
I vote no for my constituents that backdrop that I have and the feedback from the constituents in the town I've talked to, absolutely not.
Thank you. The order is confirmed and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the second item on the discussion agenda, Case 18-F-0262, application of High Bridge Wind, LLC, for a certificate of environmental compatibility and public need pursuant to Article 10 to construct an approximately 100-megawatt wind-powered electric generating facility located in the town of Guilford, Shenango County, presented by Erica Bergen, Administrative Law Judge, Department of Public Service, James Costello, Administrative Law Judge, Department of Public Service, Daniel O'Connell, Administrative Law Judge, Department of Environmental Conservation, Dakin McCakes, Chief Administrative Law Judge, Department of Public Service, and Robert Rosenthal, General Counsel, are available for questions. Judge Bergen, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the Citing Board. My name is Erica Bergen, and I co-presided over this case with James Costello and with Associate Examiner Daniel O'Connell of the Department of Environmental Conservation. The item before you is a proposed order granting a certificate of environmental compatibility and public need to Highbridge Wind, LLC, subject to certain terms and conditions. Highbridge Wind, or Highbridge, proposes to construct and operate a commercial-scale wind power electric generating facility in the town of Guilford in Shenango County. The project is a large-scale renewable energy facility consisting of up to 25 wind turbines and related facilities and will generate up to 100 megawatts of electricity. The grant of a certificate to Highbridge would be subject to the conditions that are attached to the proposed order. The proposed order is supported by an evidentiary record that supports all the statutory findings the Citing Board must make before issuing a certificate pursuant to Article 10 of the Public Service Law. The Article 10 review process, both in the pre-application and application phases in this case, was extensive, fair, and accessible to the public. Notice to the public was provided with respect to all significant milestones in the case. There were many instances of community outreach and education and numerous opportunities for public participation. Highbridge implemented the requisite public involvement program by, among other things, establishing a project-specific website, local document repositories, and a toll-free telephone number for members of the public to call for information about the project. In addition, Highbridge hosted a virtual public information session in September 2020, which included a presentation by Highbridge and a question and answer session. Throughout the Article 10 process, the Department of Public Service also engaged in public outreach activities and sent notice of all significant project milestones to the party and service list. The examiners hosted 2 public statement hearings via WebEx in October 2020 and encouraged public comments to be submitted through other means. Aside from the statutory parties in this case, the town of Guilford and a local intervener group, the Guilford Coalition of Non-Participating Residents, or GCNR, were active parties and were represented by counsel. Intervener funding was awarded to the town at the pre-application phase and to both the town and GCNR during the application phase. The department received approximately 180 public comments in this case on DMM and at the public statement hearing. Most of the comments opposed the project, focusing on environmental, health, and financial impacts, as well as impacts on community character. Comments in support of the project cite the economic benefits to the local community, as well as broad support of renewable energy development to counter the harms posed by global warming. The proposed certificate conditions attached to the order before you address the identified environmental impacts of the project, including the impacts that have been subject of public concern. The proposed conditions are based on the conditions presented in a settlement proposal negotiated by Highbridge, the town, the staff of the Department of Public Service, Department of Environmental Conservation, Department of Agriculture and Markets, and the Department of Health. In signing the settlement proposal, Department of Public Service staff, or DPS staff, took exception to certain provisions of the sound testing compliance protocol proposed by Highbridge. DPS staff and Highbridge disagreed over, 1, the validity of sound level data collected when ground level wind speeds are greater than 5 meters per second, 2, the use of secondary wind screens, and 3, whether it is necessary to add a 1.5 dBA correction to actual sound measurements for residences that have 2 or more stories. In accordance with prior siting board orders, the proposed order here adopts DPS staff's position that the proper use of wind screening avoids the need to discard sound data collected when ground level wind speeds are greater than 5 meters per second, that secondary wind screens must be used in addition to the use of the 7-inch diameter wind screens proposed by Highbridge to reduce the influence of wind noise on sound testing microphones and improve the accuracy of measurements taken at certain low-frequency sounds, and that a 1.5 dBA correction should be applied to actual sound measurements taken at residences that have 2 or more stories. In addition, Highbridge has agreed to develop a final noise complaint resolution protocol in consultation with the town of Guilford and submit it as a compliance filing. GCNR did not join the settlement proposal and raises several substantive arguments in opposition to the project. Instead of the sound level standards proposed by the settling parties, GCNR argues that the siting board should adopt sound level standards that are in compliance with the conditional recommendation made by the World Health Organization in 2018 of 45 dBA LDEN outside a receptor residence. The proposed order rejects GCNR's proposal, however, and adopts the sound levels proposed by the settling parties, noting that they are the same noise limitations that the siting board consistently has determined in other recently approved projects to be appropriately protective of health and minimize potential annoyance. The proposed order also finds GCNR claims regarding sound level and shadow flicker impacts on one resident who is alleged to suffer from migraines, and with respect to shadow flicker impacts on another individual at the same location who allegedly suffers from photosensitive epilepsy, as unsupported by the evidentiary record in the case. The proposed order notes that the sound levels expected at the individual's residence are below the sound levels proposed by the settling parties, and that the evidence offered into the record is insufficient to support a finding that shadow flicker will have a negative impact on people with migraines or photosensitive epilepsy. The proposed order rejects GCNR's argument that the applicant was obligated to conduct an independent medical examination of the two individuals in order to refute GCNR's position regarding impacts from sound and shadow flicker, inasmuch as the Public Service Law does not require an individualized impact analysis for residents who oppose Article 10 projects. Moreover, the 30-hour annual shadow flicker limit and mitigation measures required by the order are consistent with the standard siting board requirements in prior cases, as well as the town's renewable energy system local law. GCNR further argues that the project will negatively impact the rural and natural environment of the town, and that the applicant has presented no plan to mitigate what GCNR claims will be a fundamental change to existing community character. The proposed order recognizes that the addition of the proposed wind turbines will have an impact on the community character of the town with respect to those areas of the town that are within the view shed of the turbines. The order also recognizes that measures to mitigate and minimize visual impacts from wind turbines are limited given their height and size. Here, the settling parties agreed to various proposed certificate conditions to avoid, minimize, and mitigate visual impacts to the maximum extent practicable, including a requirement that the applicant file a final cultural resources mitigation and offset plan to address adverse visual impacts on historic resources. We note that for its part, GCNR did not suggest or request any additional or different mitigation efforts than those proposed by the settling parties. In our view, and in the view of DPS staff, if the Siting Board adopts the certificate conditions proposed by the settling parties, visual impacts resulting from the project will be avoided or minimized to the maximum extent practicable. GCNR also raised concerns about potential adverse impacts to groundwater and wells for blasting and other construction activities. Under proposed Certificate Condition 87, no wind turbine will be located within 100 feet of an existing water supply well or intake. No blasting activities will be conducted within 500 feet of any known active water supply well or intake on any non-participating parcel. Highbridge will take water samples pre- and post-blasting of active water supply wells on non-participating properties within 1,000 feet of any blasting activities. And Highbridge will drill a new well if the water provided by any such well passed water quality standards before construction, but not after construction. These proposed setbacks and potable water quality testing requirements are consistent with prior Siting Board cases. Therefore, we do not believe that the record supports the concerns raised by GCNR in this regard. Highbridge requests waiver of 3 local law provisions. The first prohibits the building or construction of structures or the operation of equipment between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. in a manner that produces a continuous noise that results in harassment and undue disturbing of the peace and quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood. There is no opposition to Highbridge request for a limited waiver. Proposed Certificate Condition 83 limits construction and routine maintenance activities on the project from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday and 8 a.m. through 8 p.m. on Sunday and national holidays, with the exception of wind turbine construction limited to the immediate turbine site and delivery activities, which may need to occur during extended hours beyond the schedule on an as-needed basis. The Siting Board granted a similar waiver in the Cassadaga Wind Article 10 proceeding on the ground that the construction time limits would be unreasonably burdensome if they prevented construction activities during extended hours on an as-needed basis to address unusual circumstances, such as a time-sensitive construction stage that may be affected by inclement weather. The proposed order grants the limited waiver requested here for the same reasons. However, to ensure that Certificate Condition 83 appropriately reflects the limited nature of the waiver requested and granted, the proposed order modifies the certificate condition to clarify that the waiver would apply on an as-needed basis to address unusual circumstances. The second local law subject to a waiver request requires removal of turbine foundations to a depth of 4 feet below ground surface in both agricultural and non-agricultural lands. The applicant seeks a waiver of the 4-foot depth requirement with respect to non-agricultural land, stating that it is standard industry practice to remove to a depth of 3 feet below ground in such areas. The applicant states that decommissioning costs would be increased for excavation of concrete foundations through blasting, drilling, or other noise-intensive activities that otherwise would be unnecessary because foundations in non-agricultural lands can be buried and left in place without negatively impacting the surrounding land. Weighing the costs involved and the lack of benefit to be achieved, and given the absence of any objection to the requested waiver, the proposed order finds that the local law's excavation depth requirements for turbine foundations on non-agricultural lands would be unduly burdensome if applied here. And finally, Highbridge Wind also seeks a waiver of the local law requirement in that it posts a letter of credit in a face amount of not less than 120% of the estimated cost of complete decommissioning and removal. The town agrees with Highbridge that a letter of credit in the amount of 110% of the decommissioning and site restoration costs, updated every 5 years and without an offset for salvage value, appropriately protects the town's interests. The signatory parties have agreed to that revised security amount, which is consistent with prior siting board orders. Absent a demonstrated need for the posting of additional security, and absent any objection to the requested waiver in this case, the proposed order grants the waiver. The record in this case supports a finding by the board that the probable environmental impacts of the construction and operation of the facility will be minimized or avoided to the maximum extent practicable, provided that the applicant complies with the certificate conditions. The record also supports a finding by the board that the facility is designed to operate in compliance with all applicable state and local environmental, health, and safety laws and regulations. The proposed order, if adopted, would find that the construction and operation of the project will serve the public interest because the project will be consistent with state energy policies, long-range energy planning objectives, the strategies set forth in the most recent state energy plan, and the additional social, economic, and other factors deemed relevant by the board. The examiners recommend that the board adopt the proposed order, including the attached certificate conditions. This ends our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Bergen, for the comprehensive presentation and the good work that went into this case. This proposed order, again, is very thoughtful, flows from an open and extensive public process, and is supported by strong evidentiary record. The proposed order contains conditions that appropriately deal with the identified concerns. I believe the proposed resolution is balanced and, in my opinion, is in the public interest. I will be supporting this item. I will now turn to my fellow board members for any comments or questions. Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I do have one comment. First, thank you, Judge Bergen, for the presentation. I had a question relating to visual impacts. I am familiar with this and other areas of the Southern Tier that have been selected as sites for wind projects, and understandably, one of the reasons that these areas are so attractive to their residents are the pastoral views and the unimpeded landscapes. So how these projects are sited and how visual impacts are addressed certainly are important. However, your presentation today, addressed the questions I had with respect to visual impacts, as well as the, thorough review in the order. So I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Dr. Lewis-Michael, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ravishir?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now call for a vote. This is Tammy Mitchell, and my vote is in favor of the recommendation to approve the application of Highbridge Wind, LLC, for a Certificate of Environmental Compatibility and Public Need as described. Mr. Alexander, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis-Michael, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Mr. Ravishir, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. The order is confirmed and the recommendation is adopted. We'll now move to the consent agenda items. Do any members of the Citing Board wish to comment or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda? Beginning with Mr. Alexander.
Chair Mitchell, I do wish to comment on case 16-F-0328, number 3 wind.
Go ahead.
Thank you. As I understand from the draft order before us, by this amendment petition, the certificate holder seeks approval to install 2 fewer turbines. That is from 31 to 29 turbines, but to increase the maximum turbine blade tip heights for up to 24 turbines from 586 feet up to 591 feet. My first question relates to visual impacts. I understand that the supplemental visual impact analysis indicated that the increase in height of the turbines did not significantly increase visibility or increase contrast with existing conditions. I also understand that these new turbines will have blade spans of approximately 47 feet longer than the turbines they would replace. And my question is there any indication that these longer blades would cause any significant new or additional visual impacts?
So, good morning, Deputy Commissioner Alexander. It's Bob Rosenthal, General Counsel of DPS and Counsel for the Siting Board. Let me just start off with, a brief summary of the original application. I'll talk about the amendment and then the analysis. So the original application has two turbine capacities with separate technologies. 5 2.3 megawatt turbines of a GE technology, 26 3.6 megawatt turbines, also of a GE technology, for a total of 105.8 megawatts in capacity. That was approved in the original certificate. Under the amendment, there would be a reduction in the number of the higher capacity turbines from 26 to 24. The capacity of those turbines would be increased from 3.6 megawatts to a range of 4 to 4.2 megawatts, so that the same, total approved under the original certificate would apply, which is 105.8 megawatts. A Vestas design would replace the GE design on the larger turbines. You noted some of the key attributes, and I'll go into them in total. So there would be 2 less higher capacity turbines. The remaining 29 turbines would be sited in the same location. And as you noted, although the turbine blades on the Vestas design would be 47 feet longer than the GE design, the tip height would be increased by only 5 feet, and that's because the height of the turbine hub would be decreased. So it would be the hub would be closer to the ground, and although the blades would be longer, the tip height would be only 5 feet greater. So there was an analysis that was conducted by Saratoga Associates on behalf of Number 3 Wind that's included with the amendment, and it shows that the overall project visibility would have an increase of approximately 0.1% within the 5-mile study area and less than 0.1% within the 10-mile study area. And based on that conclusion, the draft order, subject to the board's approval, determines that the design change would not result in any significant adverse visual impact. With respect to your specific question, I have Andy Davis from my office on the call, and he can get into this in a little bit more detail. I think the basic answer is that the visual analysis looks at what one can see from a certain vantage point. Hence, it's why the analysis looks at tip height and not sort of the radius of the of each turbine individual. It doesn't look at the quality of what one can see. It looks at what one can see is the basic answer to your question. And I have, again, Andy Davis is on the line if he has anything further to add on that specific issue.
Good morning, Siting Board members. Andy Davis here, Chief of the Environmental Certification and Compliance section of DPS staff. The question of blade length factors into visual assessments in a couple of ways. As Bob Rosenthal pointed out, that with the longer blades will allow the hub height to be reduced. The hub height was looked at in the original application and called out separately, primarily because of the lighting, FAA warning lights that are generally mounted on the top of the nacelle, which is essentially the hub height. And the extent of that visibility should be reduced in this instance because the hub heights are reducing by a significant height of 16 feet. Thus, the longer blades having a slight increase in the maximum blade tip height. The other, so that should be a net decrease in visibility of the FAA lighting. The other issue that is considered as a factor of blade length is the shadow flicker zone, which is a factor of a visual effect of the flickering of the blades as they pass before sunlight. The longer blades here result in a slightly increased zone where the shadow flicker analysis is appropriate. That was done for this amendment, identifying some receptors that would potentially experience a greater exposure of shadow flicker, but the certificate granted includes provisions for limiting shadow flicker exposure at any non-participating residences or receptors to 30 hours per year, regardless of the blade length. So those two factors, if you have questions on that, please let me know.
I'd like to thank both Mr. Rosenthal and Mr. Davis for that discussion and review. It was quite helpful for me, and so thank you. Just noting on shadow flicker that Mr. Davis referenced, I appreciate that the order specifically, references the applicability of Certificate Condition 57 on shadow flicker, which provides for minimization and mitigation as appropriate. So my second question relates to what I would call aviation issues or aviation safety. When this application was first considered and an order issued in November of 2019, there was considerable attention given to aviation safety, the aircraft detection lighting system issue, DOD, and related aviation issues. And there were, various, filing requirements and other conditions imposed at that time. Now, it is my understanding that from this order and this process that the original Certificate Condition 38 dealing with FAA filings, the filings dealing the exterior lighting package, as well as the federal permits filing, together with all other requirements and conditions, is authorized by the certificate, will apply to this project as amended. And I just want to, confirm that my understanding in that regard is correct.
So again, thanks for your question, Deputy Commissioner Alexander, and that's accurate. Permit Condition 38C specifically provides that all materials related to the FAA approval of lighting systems to be installed on wind turbines shall be filed with the Secretary of FAA prior to construction. So that it's a pre-construction requirement. The applicant would have to provide, in the docket, that approval prior to being allowed to commence construction. It's clear in Condition 38 that the same requirement applies to any project modification as like the one provided for in the amendment. So you are correct that that there would have to be approval by FAA prior to construction.
Thank you. I appreciate it again, yours and Mr. Davis's consideration and responses to the questions I've raised. Chair Mitchell, I have no further comments.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Dr. Lewis-Michael, do you have any comments on the consent agenda?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ravishir?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Thank you. No questions.
Thank you. I will now call for a vote. This is Tammy Mitchell, and my vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Mr. Alexander, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis-Michael, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Mr. Ravishir, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Secretary Phillips, is there anything further to come before us today?
There is nothing further to come before you today.
Thank you. We are adjourned.